I'm just going to move right into introducing our first speaker, which is Ricardo Dominguez. Okay, Ricardo was a member of Critical Art Ensemble and a co-founder of Electronic Disturbance Theater 1.0, a group that developed virtual sit-in technologies in 1998 in solidarity with the Zapatista communities in Chiapas, Mexico, with Carmen Karasik, Brett Stahlbaum, and Stefan Ray. With Electronic Disturbance Theater 2.0, there's Brett Stahlbaum, Misha Cardenas, Amy Sarah Carroll, and Ellie Mermond. He co-created the Transborder Immigrant Tool, a GPS cell phone safety net tool for watching over the US-Mexico border. He is a Creative Capital awardee, a Hellman Fellow, a Society for the Humanities Fellow at Cornell University, a Rockefeller Fellow at the Bellagio Center in Italy, and a UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy Fellow. Ricardo is a professor and chair of the Department of Visual Arts and a principal investigator at Cal IT2QI, all at the University of California, San Diego. And before Ricardo comes on, I just have to say that Ricardo's probably my first proper art crush. And when I was a student in California at UCLA, I think I was like 25 years old, Ricardo gave a presentation, also mask, and it was like this Cupid's arrow just like shot straight into my heart, and it's been a love affair ever since then. Please welcome Ricardo Dominguez.
Muchas gracias. Es un placer estar aquí con todos ustedes. Ojalá podemos platicar y hablar de los zapatistas intergalácticos. Voy a comenzar. A ver. Pluriversal disturbance. In the time before time, in the space before space, in the infinity before infinity, in the immeasurable before the immeasurable, messages from the future, del futuro, me llegaron exactamente at 1 minute after midnight, 1994. The Zapatistas ripped through the electronic fabric. At the same moment that NAFTA, the free trade zone agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico was being signed, they said, ya basta, enough is enough. I was online. I began to hear these messages from the future, and they interconnected with these theories that had been developed through the 80s called electronic civil disobedience, electronic disturbance. And the Zapatistas began within a few hours to say, what you're doing is completely wrong. You need to change the conditions of cyber war, cyber terrorism, cyber crime, and you need to change what electronic disturbance and electronic civil disobedience are. It has to be cyber poetics. It has to be messages del futuro. Indigenous futurity landed in my sensibilities and my being, and it stated we need a pluriversal disturbance. We need pluriversal gestures. I had never heard pluriversal before. They also said, we call on all of you to join us in the first intergalactic gathering against neoliberalism and for humanity. And at that moment, I began to gather a community around indigenous futurism and pluriversal practices. The Zapatistas came and they taught me about coding. They taught me around the question of cyber poetics, of gathering community, of gathering data bodies and real bodies in a performative matrix, in a recombinant theater that began by reaching out through various systems to communities on a planetary scale. And these attempts to reach out through pluriversal gestures connected me to Carmen Karasik, connected me to another data body in California, Brett Stahlbaum, connected me to another body in Austin, Texas, Stephen Ray. And there, for a number of years, we started developing the practice of electronic civil disobedience as a pluriversal disturbance, guided by the Zapatistas. Now, you have to remember, browsers were brand new. The first browser came out, I think, in April 1993. It was called Mosaic. It was wild. You could put a link there. You could put an image. You could put a text. And we began to use the notion of the browser as a public agora, as a pluriversal space of communion, of gathering and contestation. Carmen and Brett developed the Zapatista Floodnet using the browser's reload function. Now, in the days when we first started doing virtual sit-ins against the Mexican government, we had to use our fingers and reload, right, over and over. And then somebody said, Ricardo, I really hurt my fingers doing that for 2 hours. And then Carmen and Brett said, why don't we create a simple little Java applet that will count how many people are hitting the website? And so we started the Zapatista Floodnet system. The other thing we did is we took a gesture from a very important net art group from the 90s called Jodi.org, who had been using 404 files, or files not found, part of the public agora, for surreal Dadaist gestures. Like, I'm looking for Dirty Fish Ballet Part 2 at the New York Times. It would say 404 file, Dirty Fish Ballet Part 2 not found. What we did is we started uploading questions into the Mexican government. Does democracy exist here? The Mexican website would say, democracy not found. We started uploading questions on the Department of Defense. Is justice found here? The Department of Defense 404, justice not found here. This was not cracktivism. We weren't breaking into the system to dig out the truth. We were just showing in a negative dialectic what didn't exist there already. Out of this then came a series of gestures that went extremely well. So well that the Department of Defense launched its first information war weapon at us at Thing.net, a server in New York City. And then they did this great review in the front page of the New York Times. The best review Electronic Disturbance Theater ever received. Indigenous futurism versus NSA crystals. Well, because of this encounter with the Department of Defense, the NSA contacted us. You guys know who the NSA is? They're listening to you right now on your cell phone, no doubt. And we said, should we go to the NSA and do a performance for them? And we gathered with a bunch of artists in New York City, and they said, yeah, you should go down there, see what they're up to. So we went down to Crystal City, there at Fort Meade, and we did a performance. There's the NSA, Fort Meade, and I, with Stephen Ray, presented to the NSA. On one side, I had Alphaville by Godard. If you remember, it's an AI dictatorship that's destroyed by poetry. Love poetry. On the other side, I had Subcomandante Marcos speaking on the call for the first intergalactic for humanity and against neoliberalism. I was in the middle doing what I'm doing right now. Stephen Ray was at the podium giving the atomic facts. This is what we did, this is what you did, this is what we did, this is what you did. Now, we did all of this transparently. Our data bodies were transparent. Our code was transparent, but I was opaque in my mask. Now, at the back of the theater, they weren't as good looking as all of you are, was this man called Arlen Specter, who was a senator from Pennsylvania, very right wing. And he said, "Young man, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Why can't we arrest you?" He looked like the smoking man in X-Files. And I said, "You can't arrest us because we're not doing cyber war, we're not doing cyber terrorism, we're not doing cyber crime, we're doing electronic civil disobedience." He said, "Yes, but what is it you're actually saying? These stories of Mayan technology, what the hell is that?" I said, I, the big nose, was walking at the edge of the Toholabal village. To the side of me was Lamar, the deepest and wisest of the Zapatistas. On the other side was Don Durito, the most famous invisible bug in all of Lacandon. We were walking right into the Toholabal village when suddenly, boom, at the bottom of my shoe, Pedrito, a 3.5-year-old child, bumped into me. And I said, "Oyes, Pedrito, ¿qué estás haciendo? What are you doing down there?" And he said, "I'm picking up the men and women who are going to the consultation of the 25th. And I said, "Muy bien, Pedrito, but what do you have in your hand down there?" He said, "It's my truck." I said, "Pedrito, be realistic. That's not a truck. It's a rock." "Well, it's not even a rock. It's a pebble." And Pedrito looked up at me and said, "Big nose, that is your problem. You Zapatistas have no imagination." I turned to Lamar, the deepest and wisest of the Zapatistas, and I said, "That is very true. The Zapatistas have no imagination." Suddenly, Don Durito, the most famous invisible bug and highly educated, said, "If only you read the books that I have told you to read." And I said, "Yes, Don Durito, if only we were as educated as you, I'm sure we Zapatistas would have an imagination." Well, we continued marching into the Toholabal village, and there were the communities, the men and women trying to decide which man and woman would go to the consultation of the 25th. When suddenly above us, a commander-type plane from the Mexican army flew and roared above us. On the other side, a Mexican military helicopter given to them by the Department of Defense for drug wars was flying above us as well. The roar and din was deafening. But Pedrito, in the middle of the village, looked up and said, "Ay, ya basta!" And zoom, he went into his home. Zoom, he came back out faster than I have ever seen any human move. And in his hand was a stick. And he said, "Watch this, big nose. Garum, 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 garum." Suddenly, the commander-type plane, blue and yellow, made a half circle and went away. On the other side, the Mexican government helicopter, given by the Department of Defense, slid away to the edge of the village. Everything returned back to normal. The community continued in consultation. Pedrito, satisfied with what he had done, threw the stick down, picked up his truck, his rock, and pip, pip, todos a consulta del 21, pip, pip, todos a consulta del 21. Well, I being the big nose, I walked over. I picked up the stick and I gave it a scientific viewing. its length, its weight, smell, taste. I turned to Lamar and said, "It's a stick." Lamar looked at me and said, "Yes, it's a stick." I decided to put the stick in my pocket, and we continued marching out. And there at the edge of the village, right as we were exiting, Comandante Tacho was coming in. And Comandante Tacho said, "Oyes, Big Nose, what do you have in your pocket there?" I took out the stick, and Lamar looked at him and said, "It's Mayan technology." Above me was the Mexican helicopter that had slid to the edge of the village. I tried to remember what Pedrito had done. I lifted my stick and went, "Karum, karum, karum." Suddenly, the helicopter became a giant tin vulture. It fell straight to the ground. The clouds parted. The sun came out. Everything became like golden marzipan. Dun, dun. Well, the NSA did not like this story. The smoking man did not like this story because it didn't answer why they couldn't arrest us. And that has been a continuation in all the research I have done, telling others about Mayan technology, how you can use it and develop it for pluriversal disturbances. El Caracol, the truth of the story. I'm going to tell you a few flights of pluriversality. Deportation class action 2001. I was invited by several different groups in Germany to shut down Lufthansa for their abuse and leading to the death of several immigrants and refugees, where they would place them on public planes, mummify them, and then dump them somewhere. But the mummification also asphyxiated a number of immigrants. And so they asked us to teach them electronic civil disobedience. We let everybody know what we were going to do, that we were going to shut down Lufthansa. We dressed like Lufthansa individuals. And we let everybody know, online demonstration against deportation. Lufthansa went down at the same time that there was a stockholders meeting. The stewards union said they wouldn't fly another deportation class action. The union of pilots said they wouldn't fly another deportation class action. But what happened is that we were brought in by the lower court of Frankfurt, and the administrator of the virtual sit-in was brought in under cyber terrorism charges, and I think it was like 10,000 euros. We protested, said, no, it's electronic civil disobedience. The next month, the higher court of Frankfurt overturned the lower court of Frankfurt and said that German citizens have the right to do electronic civil disobedience. The Trans-Border Immigrant Tool 2006, pluriversal flips. If you remember in 2000, global positioning system was given to civilians by the US military. And so we began to examine what was possible on the US-Mexico border. It's very easy to get arrested. You just have to be happy. There I am being happy looking at the pluriversal future. So it was going to be simple to disturb the border, the way it's constructed, the way it watches. And this is Electronic Disturbance Theater 2.0. And what we did is developed a transport immigrant tool using a very inexpensive iMotorola phone that would navigate through the Devil's Highway, immigrants and refugees, to water, to safety. And we flipped it from being a global positioning system to a geopoetic system because we thought the authorities would never be able to shut down a geopoetic system. The phone also has a haptic element. If you're dehydrated and can't read the little screen, it vibrates if you're going the right direction. Here's the iMotorola. It was a tiny phone. It also had 15 different languages of poetry that got us into a great deal of trouble. It was poetry that made the US Congress very angry. This is an update using Nokia. It's a very simple tool, navigation to water on the Anza Borrego area in Southern California. We gave information to newspapers on how to use the navigation in Mexico and on the border. Now, the FBI came and accused us of cyber terrorism. Congress said we were traitors to the nation, and Fox News said that we deserved to die. And so we started getting a lot of nativist bullets. That is, people came up with great ways to kill me. Like they would say, on a rainy day, I'm going to slam your ugly brown face on the ground, and with my truck, I'll smash it like a watermelon. So it was very careful and very thoughtful ways of killing one. It wasn't just, I'm going to kill you. The other thing that really freaked out the military and other communities was the poetry. They said the poetry would delete the border. We spent about 3 years fighting in the courts around the question of the transporter immigrant tool, and using Mayan technology, we won. These are water barrels that we set out in the desert with poems in multiple languages. The palindrome, pluriversal, search and sing system. I am the principal investigator of the UC Center for Drone Ethics, Policy and Ethics, and we are at the center of Drone Valley. We produce 80% of all the unmanned aerial vehicles produced in the world. Probably the most famous is the Predator, but we also do hobbyist. And it's a wide industry, and my university is a key player in the algorithms and code that develop this drone valley. Now, dronology led to a crash right in front of Dr. Seuss Library, the iconic library of UC San Diego. So it's a good thing that I was there to begin to investigate why a drone crashed. This led to the development of another project called the Palindrome. It was a copy of the well-known Predator drone. The idea is that it will chase Homeland Security drones and sing to them the language, the music, the poetry of the border. But of course, things have to go rasquache. You don't always come up with what you want. You have to go with what is available. And so we started experimenting with just other drones, and we were invited by the Mexican Biennial to do 3 ecologies. And we started bringing the drones to the border. Homeland Security said, whatever you do, don't let those drones cross the border, and don't smash them into the border wall. And here you have us getting the drones ready. Border Patrol is quite freaked out.
Nací en los algodales bajo un sol abrasador. Mis manos encallecieron.
Unfortunately, our drones did smash into the border, and feral drones did cross the border as they sung. Border Patrol tried to arrest us, but they were afraid of our antennas. As we said, it used to be that humans had roots, now humans have antennas. Make America Greater Mexico Again was the hats we were wearing. Pluriversal futurism. It's part of developing cosmoviviencia, a system of imagining something other than the universal, a specific Western universalism that can coexist with us, but coexist is different than be above us. Mayan technology landed in my space of being in 1994, 1 minute after midnight, and so I leave some Mayan technology here with all of you. Muchas gracias.
Thanks so much, Ricardo. That was amazing, beautiful. You're such an incredible storyteller. Let's see, we have time for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions, comments they'd like to address to Ricardo? Okay, yeah, wonderful.
You mentioned earlier some of your earlier works. Thank you. And that was very interesting that you could share also all of this from your perspective, also perhaps more on the American and Mexican side. But I'm from a different generation, actually, where all these access to internet were already privatized somehow, and the mentality kind of changed also throughout the years, especially from 2000, 2010. And most of the work you presented were before this age. So my question comes, so is there a difference now to what is disobedient when the internet, at the beginning, as I understand it, was very open, actually. Open source was not even a big thing at the time because it was normal to, everyone could add something. And now it's really a trend to be open source, but it's the same concept, actually. So how does this graduation happen?
Well, I think you're quite right, and that's why I would say that the kind of work we were doing in the 90s really ended with the Lufthansa in 2001. Then we moved into locative, dislocative media. It was no longer about the internet, but about creating a different sense of the performative matrix of data bodies in real bodies that was now part of a new condition at that moment in 2006 of what we call GPS, right? So we already understood that things needed to switch to a different line of flight. So that's why then we moved into the palindrome, right? Because this is a different line of flight. So they're no longer related to the kind of construction and performative matrix of net art, right? Platformism and the question of the cybernetics of platformism is now no longer particularly of value in terms of the early adjusters of the 90s. So that's why we teleported to the ground, right? So we are in agreement with you. So Mayan technology did not exist just within the circumference of the net, but now in different modalities. Maybe that answers the question, yeah? Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. I think, one thing that's striking about your work is there's so many concepts at play. You've mentioned the performative matrix, Mayan technology, some others we could bring in, which could be the science of the oppressed, also the relationship of simulation and disturbance. Maybe I'm curious if you, I guess on the one hand, I was curious if you could say something about science of the oppressed, and it might even speak to a bit to the first question. And then the second part of that is just, I think it would be nice to hear how you work conceptually and theoretically. I'm thinking about, you do write, you write collectively, you wrote in your former collective Critical Art Ensemble. So I'm thinking about how you make concepts, how you work with theory, how you write theory, and then maybe something about the science of the oppressed would be nice, yeah.
So one of the elements I think that is important is that It is correct that with Critical Art Ensemble in the 80s, we wanted theory to hit the ground. But at the same time, it was important in the 80s to begin to develop conceptual structures that would offer potentials for concrete gestures in the future to come. So with Critical Art Ensemble, we developed a key zone of development, which was utopian plagiarism. Utopian plagiarism was a way for us to create rapid poetry, rapid ideas. So, for instance, we were reading Thoreau's On Civil Disobedience from 1848, his protest against the Mexican-American War. And with utopian plagiarism, we just put in, or cut and pasted in now, electronic. So every time Thoreau said civil disobedience, he said electronic civil disobedience. So there we rapidly had a way to start conceiving of ideas that could then be concretized. So rather than waiting for the muse of fire to ascend the brightest heaven of invention for a new idea, we could rapidly develop ideas through this kind of fast writing. The other element that became important was that I worked in a lesbian bookstore at that time in Tallahassee called Ruby Fruit Books, after Rita Mae Brown's Ruby Fruit Jungle. And I was reading Monique Wigtig, speculative fiction. And Monique Wigtig mentions in one of her stories, Science of the Oppressed, which I also thought about engineering of the oppressed. And that is that you often see in communities that are organizing in a pluriversal way methods that circumnavigate, cut through, reroute the materialities that often function to limit, to border, to remove. So an instance of Science of the Oppressed. When you go to the US-Mexico border, you often find stacked next to the water barrels what seems to be parts of the stuffing of sofas, right? Because the US throws all its trash over the border. So what they do is that Border Patrol does Zen gardening on the border. They have these huge rakes that they put on the back of Border Patrol, and they rake the landscape so they can see where you have crossed. But immigrants and refugees cut pieces of foam. They tie the foam to their feet, which creates not feet, but just other kind of waves. And so you see them crossing, and then you see the stacks of these foam feet. There you have engineering of the oppressed, science of the oppressed, that then take the conditions of used materiality, the trash. It's almost like salvage punk, if you will, right? So again, how does one organize within the structure of a limited condition of materiality and allow the expansion of a conceptual redesigning, not just speculative design, but actually taking the materials at hand and allowing a kenopolitics, a politics of flow that isn't necessarily measurable, right? Because it's not readable on the ground. So I'm not sure if that answers.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Great, we have Shaka. Behind you, Shaka.
Cheers. You know, I'm struck, so starting in like maybe the late 1970s, the term terrorist and that label began to really congeal around Black and brown people around the world who were engaged in various actions of resistance to various hegemonic forces. And it seems like you got caught up in that in a very particular moment too, both pre and post 9/11. And I'd be curious to hear you reflect on how you saw that term and how how it was applied to you and your collaborators and the work that you did, maybe bringing it up into the present.
Well, I guess the sense of electronic disturbance and electronic civil disobedience in the 80s wasn't codified within this notion of cyber or terrorism. We were reflecting more the histories of our sisters and brothers of the 60s and 70s who had done gestures of contestation in the streets for different forms of liberation. And we wanted to translate that into data bodies against virtual capitalism that was coming. But the moment in which the attachment of these things to terrorism, war, crime really began for me in 1991 when I read Ron Felton Aquila's Cyber War is Coming. They were in the RAND Corporation, a military think tank. And they never mention electronic civil disobedience. The thing they mention is that if cyber war, cyber terrorism, and cyber crime come, cybersecurity will become a dominant language. So I think that the work that we've done has been more about establishing the value of cybersecurity as a predisposition. So even post 9/11, the expansion of the terminology of enemy combatant, of anybody fitting that, expanded. For me, it wasn't so much about you're a terrorist, you're a criminal, this is part of a war, that you are a governing value in cybersecurity, right? Because the work of electronic disturbance theater often appears in, when you're being taught cybersecurity, they often have, there was electronic disturbance theater and they did this, right? So I think that was the paradox of the situation, was that we were a key node in defining a new economic value. So after the conditions of 9/11, when we were placed under investigation by various entities, even my own institution, I ended up with 5 lawyers. Immigrant law, art law, electronic law, criminal law, labor law. And so those are expensive. And so it was 2 years. The FBI was really concerned about poetry. Fox News was concerned about the immigrant waves that were coming. My university was, you spent $5,000 in 10 years of public money. So and I also took down their website as well, but that's another tale. At the end of all this, we won, and the lawyer said, we're going to send you a bill. And I saw 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I was fucking freaked out. And they said, you'll receive a bill in 2 weeks. And sure enough, in 2 weeks, cybersecurity economy came in an envelope. I went into the bathroom, I turned off the lights, and I just vomited for several hours, shivered around the toilet, afraid. I wasn't afraid of the FBI or anybody. I was afraid of what was in this envelope. Finally, I said, Ricardo, you're going to have to open it. I opened it. And it said, Ricardo, we never even knew this kind of art existed. Everything is pro bono. Miraculo! Miraculo! Mayan technology. Pluriversal disturbance. Because that was again, another odd shift, right? Because the law team, they would sit in front of the other people and go, well, this is art, this is, all these things. But backstage they were going, art is sculpture, art is painting. Electronic civil disobedience, that's iffy, we don't know, right? But again, I was able to convince the lawyers. So again, I think for me, the pluriversal condition is the paradox that we became a keynote for defining cybersecurity as an economic structure, but at the same time, we were able to convince other territories like lawyers that what we were doing was indeed Mayan technology, was a blind probing from the future about the materialities of code, if you will, of the cybernetic condition. I don't know if that even gets close, yeah?
We have time for one more brief question. Is there? Oh, over there. Great, okay.
How would you encourage civil disobedience now, or artists to use electronic civil disobedience nowadays?
Well, I suppose for me, one has to focus on what I call micro gestures, right? That is, as artists, we have the ability to concentrate on a color, a form. So it's different than being an activist, which is about gathering large groups, having conversations. This needs to be done. We need to get her out of jail. You know, it's very cold. But as artists, it's 5 people going, I don't like that blue. You know, I think we need a different blue. So I think with micro gestures, artists, I always recommend the Anarchist 5, have to develop perhaps a durational conceptual development, right? First a concept, then a sense of materiality, gesture, and then reflection. So it's a different kind of conduit. And what an artist group does, it could be using a new platform, a new imaginary app, or you actually go to the border and you go, what would disturb the border? So for instance, one of the first micro gestures I did with Critical Art Ensemble in the early 80s was that the mall, you know the mall, had landed in Tallahassee, Florida, and nobody had ever seen a mall. You know, what is a mall? How does it function? And it's a simulated public agora, right? That the only right you have is to buy. That's really, and you're under surveillance. I grew up in Las Vegas, so I knew about simulation. I've been learning about, simulation since growing up. So, for instance, I could protest the surveillance, right? I could lock myself against the mall door and say, don't go in there, it's commodity addiction. Or what I did is I went in the mall with $20, I got a Burger King hat, I got some Hot Wheels sets, I got a tape of Prince or I don't know what, and instead of going home and opening my commodities like a good commodity fetishist, I just broke out my commodities, not at the exit, but near it, at the entrance, and I just started playing with it. Soon, what happens with micro gestures is that power march on stage, and they do what power does. So security came, people gathered, and they said, is this a Vietnam vet, a drug addict, a houseless person that doesn't know what to do with their commodities? And there you had an invisible theater, a performative matrix, where people started asking questions. You didn't have to point to the problem, they articulated the problem. So that might be one way to consider a pluriversal shift between what you imagine as contestation and protest, and more a disturbance in the space that then creates a dialogue with the community. So the virtual sit-in created conversations with artists, military, zapatistas, and we could watch the different stages of power come on and do their thing. That makes sense? So I think that's what art can do, artivism. think of a micro gesture, think of a space in which it can occur, and what sort of politics of the question can emerge that can support the politics of the answer of the wider community. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Ricardo. Thank you so much. Let's give everyone.